Hello, I'm Cara, and today I want to talk a bit about something I spend a lot of time thinking about, and because I'm just recording these videos on my phone and not editing them at all, because that's where I am with my brain. I learned the definition of pathological demand avoidance, which is something that some neurodivergent people experience, and it defines the thing that I have known very most clearly about how my brain is weird for decades. So anyway, we're doing it this way because at least it'll be something. And yes, so what I want to talk about is white supremacy and racism, and trying to process and unpack and even figure out how I might start to heal from my place in this system. And as I think I mentioned in a different video, but I find that using the concept of a dysfunctional family is very helpful to me in understanding things like, any kind of, especially hierarchical group, including our countries and, other levels of institutions and governments. I don't want to make a long list, but that includes all of us in kind of the larger world of whiteness, because whiteness is a concept that was created in order to oppress other people. It's not something that actually exists. It is just an absence of the bad things that we're judging, right? And the bad things are only bad, and we're only judging them because we want to take advantage of those people. So it's hard to, in terms of my, a personal identity and narrative, it's hard to feel like I can even get my hands on where this system lives, where these concepts and what this has done to me personally. And so the first thing is, I think about this quote a lot from an Aboriginal elder and activist in Australia. I found it credited at one point to Lilla Watson. I've also seen it credited to just a collective group of Aboriginal activists, and I think that both of those identities are important as authors of the quote. Anyway, but it's that if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So I think about that a lot, and how I can see that, because part of, there's so many layers to white supremacy, in that we have to learn that it even exists, learn that we've been privileged, which can be painful. And then I think some of us overcorrect to seeing ourselves as never victims. And I don't think that can possibly be true. And I mean, scholars like Michelle Alexander, who has my favorite description of the beginning of racism of modern anti-black racism and white supremacy, in her book A New Jim Crow, talks about how these concepts, this system, was created by wealthy white landowners, because they didn't want poor white people and poor black and indigenous people to all work together to push back against all the shit they were doing. They wanted us poor white people to be so much more focused on the poor black people or indigenous people, and laser focused, like making sure that they don't ever get anything they don't deserve, and make sure they know that they don't deserve anything, that we don't notice how badly we have it. And it very much still functions that way to this day. So, in order to talk about this, I'm first going to talk about my experience growing up in a dysfunctional family. So I apologize if that's something you don't want to think about. This next section will not be great for you. I created these little puppets, or little paper, I don't know. Puppets is maybe too grand a word. But my brain will let me do this, but not sit down at the computer and edit. So this is what we have. But this is what we're going to be talking about for a little while. So I grew up, we're just going to talk about these four. I grew up in a household with both my parents and a younger brother. So they're parents and younger brother. And I just had a conversation with my brother a few weeks ago, but like nobody in our family has been okay for for at least the last century. Like for my grandparents' generation, that meant growing up in the war and the Depression here and in Germany. The three grandparents that I knew, or that I've had any kind of relationship, all also had at least one of their parents die when they were quite young, and just generally a lot of chaos and trauma. And then for my parents, the trauma that I'm aware of for them was largely just surviving growing up with these parents who were so traumatized and had no help to deal with it, and then mostly just took that out on their children in one way or another. Anywho, so my parents, and then me, followed by my brother in the 80s. And let's see, I'm not going to talk, I'm going to try to talk everything as little as possible. But essentially, I was the golden child. I was my father's favorite. And that was not, that started when I was an infant, when I could not possibly, I was not doing anything other than existing to justify that. And likewise, my brother as an infant was simply, the target, is the best word that I've come up with, but he was, I don't know what to say other than that my father acted like he hated him. And he would frequently, when he had outbursts, and which I've just labeled pain, because there's a lot of talk about narcissists and abusers. And from my experience, they're not in control of themselves. They are in a great deal of pain and cannot control themselves. And part of how they act out is trying to control the people around them. And that's not, I say that I'm not trying to diminish responsibility, because if you are someone who, if you notice yourself feeling out of control, feeling like you're losing control, and you're taking out those feelings or hurting people around you or yourself, you don't deserve to be hurt either, but hurting yourself and people around you, it is your responsibility to find a way to get help and not do that. So people, abusive people are suffering, and that doesn't diminish their responsibility. That's my understanding. So when he would have an outburst for whatever reason, I was a child, so I worked very hard to understand his emotions and felt like it was my job to manage them. But overall, it was, for whatever reason, something triggered something. Excuse me. and he was in a bad mood, he would most often be taking that out on my little brother, which was generally through screaming. And it was very scary for all of us. So, especially in those moments, my mother took on the role, was a protector, and her primary goal was to get my brother out of the situation. And I felt then I was left alone with this pain explosion, and felt it was my job to manage that and manage him and try to get him to calm back down and not to continue his explosion and follow my brother to continue taking it out on him. So I felt that was my job. I learned that was a role that I learned. So next to this, so this is my mother. We actually homeschooled even, but regardless of that, there was quite a bit of time my mom stayed at home with us. There was quite a bit of time when it was the three of us, and we could, at least to some extent, we're still all, nobody's perfect. My mother wasn't, was doing her best to a much higher degree, but still not perfect. But we could at least to some extent all be people, and all be, we're kids learning how to be people, figuring out what we're interested in the world and learning about it. And then when more and more, when my father would come home from work, we couldn't predict his emotions. So I felt like it was my job to be only the golden child. And this is really a role that I want to talk a lot about, because we do, the golden child isn't something that's only talked about in terms of dysfunctional families. Here it's like, basically, I feel a role that was assigned to me, not a thing that I earned or could earn, but it was definitely a set of behaviors or a way of being that I learned. And again, I'll keep talking about this, but the way, yeah. So and that meant, not being too, not being unhappy with anything, certainly, trying to anticipate other people's needs. It meant, not being loud, not, more and more just like not having my own needs. But also, I was the golden child. I would regularly be praised. And this ended up with some very complicated, so I'm going to talk a little, mention a few things that were, more specifically true for my family, for our dynamic. Like, I have early memories of doing something I was proud of. Like, I love to read, and a big thing that my father was upset with my younger brother for is that he didn't learn to read until later. He was a late reader, which is fine. It's fine to be a late reader. I was an early reader, and I loved to read, and that was something that, my family, my parents and my extended family knew how to praise, knew how to recognize. But I have memories of doing things like finishing a book and being excited about myself and wanting to tell my parents and feeling like I couldn't or shouldn't, not couldn't, but shouldn't, because anything I did that made me look too good or like too good of a person or stand out too much, would turn my brother into a target, because it would just almost immediately become a way for my father a weapon for him to use against my brother for no reason. So I was the point I want to make is I was the golden child. I was praised, definitely. I wouldn't rather have been the target. But also I was not okay. I could not be my full self. Yeah. And also, the other thing I wanted to say. Okay. So also, as time went on in my memory, and again, I'm talking, just about my own perspective. These are all, I'm talking about my family, but I'm talking about human beings with all complex other experiences that I cannot really speak to. I'm speaking to what it felt like to be in my role in this family. But as time went on, I felt like I really needed to be in that golden child role all the time, whether my father was there or not. Partially because I felt like I always needed to be ready for him to explode and for me to be left alone with him, for my mom and brother to be gone. I felt like I always had to be ready for that. And I generally just felt like I didn't know who I was. That's a big part of kind of my whole deal, is that it's been very confusing for me to know who I am, and who I even am. That's a thing I'm still building. So, my mother was finally my parents divorced when I was 12. My mother, we were finally able to leave. And he did his own things. But, so when I was 12, we're out of that, at least day to day. We still had visitation weekends for a few years, which were rough. But, at least day to day, we're out of the situations that put us into these roles. So we can heal a bit and develop, our own, there's a very different dynamic with just me and my mom and brother. And the main cause of our chaos and trauma was no longer present, but still, traumatized people aren't perfect. So other stuff was going on, obviously. But, and then also in my role with my father, sorry, I'm just double checking in my brain that the things I think are relevant. So we'd have visitation weekends, and he would still be he'd have a lot emotionally invested in our visitation weekends. So it was often very extremely high stakes emotionally. And I would feel like I had to be the golden child. And for me, after a certain point, the only way I really knew how to do that was to dissociate. I would read, there are a number of books that I know that I read in a single day while I was on a Saturday at his house. And, do not know the plots to, 14, 15. I know I read the Michael Crichton book Congo in a day. I cannot tell you, I can tell you one detail from the opening of that book. I have no idea what happens in it, but I know I read it in a day. Anyway. But then as I started to, I was in therapy and getting other help. So there were a few incidents where I tried to step out of my role, step out of that golden child role, which was always very scary, but either stand up for my brother, get between my dad and my brother when an explosion was happening, or stand up for myself, including just saying that I didn't really want to be at his house. That was completely unacceptable, extremely, extremely upsetting, and completely unacceptable. And my father eventually cut off contact with us because he didn't know how to deal with it. But yeah, so as I've unpacked this, which I've done, with journaling and therapists and various kinds of work, I have realized that what whiteness feels the most like to me is this golden child role, where, for me, because it's something that can be positive, you can get praise, you definitely don't have to deal with, if you even know, if we have to notice the effects of white supremacy and anti-blackness as white people, without learning it. If we just see its effects in the wild. It's more, or in the wild, in our society, it's more likely to just feel like something we're lucky not to have to deal with, or something we must deserve not to have to deal with. It can feel like a compliment in that sense. Like, obviously, those are some of the feelings that come up for a lot of white people, that we're being told we don't deserve the things that we have. We don't deserve praise that we've gotten, or whatever it is. Yeah. So, but then we have to talk about how a society and an assigned racial group is extremely different from just four people in a family, right? Because when I was 12, I was no longer in that role, at least not all the time, not daily, not the same way. It took a while. Anyway, not relevant right now. But because even thinking about just the members of my family, like my little brother, as I imagine him going out into the world, I'm not actually speaking for him, but he's carrying all this pain from our personal, our family trauma, but he's also a little guy, little Superman. He's, a straight white man. So in terms of society, he doesn't have any of those extra burdens that are placed on folks who are assigned into different racial groups. And neither do I. I'm a woman-ish, so I have to deal with that. But out in the world, I am white. I'm intelligent in the way that many people recognize. So some of those things I still feel like, anyway, some aspects of this role have been extremely difficult for me to escape, because getting praised for being smart makes me feel kind of bad because I feel like it's going to be used as a weapon against someone else. But again, that's like personal level stuff, and societal level stuff. I have some experience, obviously experience with what it feels like to be a woman in society, and how I'm treated because of that. But I don't have to be on the receiving end of trauma, or the most aggressive, at least, receiving end of the trauma that's handed out in our society. So I don't have to deal with that. Anyway, so I'm kind of flailing around, because this video, I don't have I don't have full parallels to draw, because it's a different system. It's on a completely different scale, but emotionally that parallel is there. So I also wanted to, well, I don't know, I think in a future video I'd like to talk about, I want to make some more videos in this series about how whiteness is bad for everybody, including people who are given privilege. I mean, privilege is real, like, has real impacts, but it's not we're not actually being helped. Like, what would help us all is a just society, right? Anyway, so in a future video, I want to talk a little bit about what I know and feelings that what I know and learned about especially my grandparents' experiences as white people here in the Midwest, in Iowa, Nebraska, and in Germany. But basically, I just wanted to make this video. I want to start, this is definitely going to be a series, but start talking about how I know, like, obviously white people are not okay, right? Obviously, we have also been traumatized by this violent system that we've all been living in, even though the targets, the recipients of that violence are, the majority of the recipients are black and brown people in this country, black people and indigenous people, and and queer people in different ways. Like, that's the thing too, is like these, as and we're seeing, like, just terrifying developments for categories. Once a category exists of people who aren't really people, which is, what the race black has meant, or what the original assigners, like creators of that category, wanted blackness to mean. I mean, black people in the US have created so much, like, been full humans this whole time under completely inhumane conditions, and created so much art and culture out of that. So that's not what blackness means now, or for maybe any time, but except after the moment that it was first, like, spoken as an idea to create a category of humans that aren't human. But as soon as we have one of those categories, like, none of us are really safe, and I think we feel that on some level, because, and yeah, obviously this is related to the, like, kidnappings, and not deportations, but kidnappings and extrajudicial deportation, I guess, of people that the Trump administration is doing right now. Like, it doesn't matter who the first targets are, whatever the justification is, just matters that there is a justification, and then we're all in danger, to differing degrees, but the only way to get out of that danger is to stand up for the people who are at most risk. Anywho, yeah, so I guess that's something that I've been thinking about, and that I want to put outside of my own brain, because I've been thinking about it for a long time, about trying to even understand what whiteness has done to my brain, like how I've been hurt and how I can heal from it. I'm going to try to remember. I'm going to put some link to some educators, especially black educators, who I've seen talk about how white people, like, we need to do our own emotional work, or we leave ourselves as emotional bombs, I think is what one person said to anyone trying to do racial justice work. Because if we leave all of this trauma and pain unprocessed, then it can just explode out whenever it gets touched or brushed, which is, going to happen if we are actually in real conversation about racism and white supremacy. So, anyway, that's my, oh, I guess I'll just close out with this couple other pictures of these little people doing our best as tiny children. I always love to show off my late 80s haircuts and this wonderful dinosaur button up. Anyway, so we have to be able to, I think, put ourselves, understand that we are in multiple roles at once. We are being harmed, and we're also capable of harm at the same time. And that's true, I felt that, I knew that to be true of myself as a child, just in my family. And I also know that that's true, especially as a white woman in the US. White women have themselves, or just have had their identities used as weapons, especially against black men, with fatal outcomes many times. So Yeah. I'd love to know if anyone watches this and has thoughts on what has helped you start processing. Like, I don't even know if it's possible for me to fully see the problem at this point, but we've got to start, right? We've got to start. So, yes, thank you, and I'll be back.